All right, guys, so we're going to start the power section using our ultimate sandbag again. So it makes sense. If the ultimate sandbag we're saying is one of the best tools to use to teach the hip hinge and the deadlift, that when we start introducing power, that we go back to it. Now there's a lot of different tools we're going to use for power. It's not going to be just the ultimate sandbag, but a lot of the attributes of the ultimate sandbag that we discussed in the deadlift make it such an amazing tool to use to teach the concepts of power. Now, why aren't we using the barbell again for a lot of the power drills? You're not going to see really the barbell come up. Comes a couple different reasons. Probably the biggest is just the accessibility. Like, we're still going to get the attributes of the barbell lifts, even though we're not going to have to use the barbell itself. Something that's been argued for literally decades in the strength and conditioning community is whether or not we have to teach Olympic lifts to athletes. So again, if we're thinking that wrong, because a lot of coaches think that the Olympic lifts are too complex for a lot of athletes to pick up or they can't coach it, then they look for alternatives that teach the qualities of the movement, because unless we're training Olympic lifters, then we'd use the barbell. We have to really look at what we're trying to achieve. So for a lot of our clients, we just want the qualities of that power development. That means specifically trying to get hip extension and, if possible, ankle, knee, and hip extension in what we call triple extension of the body. That's what makes a lot of these drills so powerful, and we get that in when we run, we walk, we jump, and so forth. So with all that said, what we're going to do is use the tension of the ultimate sandbag to, again, create that plank. So one of the things that makes it so accessible to people is that we don't have to have the same rack position. That doesn't always mean it's easier, as we'll show you in a moment. Secondly, unlike the barbell, where a lot of people tend to just drop the weight after they sort of lift the weight up, whether it's snatch, clean, and so forth, we have to work on deceleration. So a lot of this trouble and the coaching that you're going to have to do is not going to be on the upward phase of the movement. It's actually going to be on the eccentric phase, teaching people how to move quickly as they come down. Now that's a great opportunity because, as Coach Robert Dos-Ramirez points out, most injuries occur because of lack of deceleration strength. So it's a great opportunity to build another quality of our functional training. So what we're going to look at is we actually have two different cleans when we're talking about with the ultimate sandbag. Most people think we always just go right into the crooks of the arms, which is our front load clean. You're going to see in a moment, we actually teach people to clean to fist first. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that the ultimate sandbag also allows us to have some slight instability. Now we're still moving dominantly in the sagittal plane. There's not large shifting of the ultimate sandbag's internal load, but because of the leverage and the instability of it not being a fixed weight like that, there is going to be slight movement. And if your movement is off, then you're not going to be able to get the weight in position. In other words, we're challenging movement accuracy just as much as we are challenging strength. So Jessica is going to set up just like in her deadlift. She's going to grab the handles. She's going to create that tension first. So again, we want to make sure that hips are low, so she can still have bend in her knees. Handles are being pulled apart. She's going to accelerate through her feet. Elbows will come high, and she's going to try to cast a weight upon her fist. So you see what happens if we miss. Okay, good. So if she faces you, you see how her hands and her elbows are in position. She's in that nice plank position. Let's come back down, Jess. We'll do one more. Set up nice and low. Handle tension. Nice. And then come back down. Now that first rep, I know I was sort of joking, giving her a hard time about missing it, but that's the beauty of having a slightly unstable object. Every repetition is different. So if something's a little bit off, you want to know what you didn't do. And for a lot of people, it's going to go back to two of the most common things. Once the weight gets in their hands, they forget about their feet. And they want to use their upper body to lift the weight up rather than push down to the ground. So think back to your deadlift, how we talked about pushing down to come up nice and tall in that plank position. So that's number one. Number two, especially after people do an initial repetition, when they come back down, they'll tend to fold into the movement. So they start flexing their elbows, rounding their shoulders, disconnecting. So we like to have people set up in between every repetition to make sure we're creating the proper tension before they perform another rep. That ensures us that we're achieving that proper plank, the tension, alignment, and then we have far more success in the motion. So let's do maybe one more, Jess. So set up first, tensions first. She's pulling the weight actually in towards her, and beautiful clean. Nice job, Jess. It's like she's done this before. So where do people also get in trouble? Some of the smaller details. Notice that the weight is completely on her feet, and she actually has a weight against her shins. When she gets, go and grab the handles, Jess, for us. She's actually pulling apart, but also pulling towards her. All right? If she were to actually pull apart, but have the handles come away from her a little bit, or just tilt, it's going to pull her forward. So again, how you're grabbing the handles makes a lot of difference, and where you position the weight makes a big difference. So why are we teaching clean to fist first? Because that is basically the front load position, getting the crooks of the arm, is the compensation often towards not being able to clean the fist. So there's two things that usually happen to people when they can't make the clean the fist properly. One is it just never gets there. It gets stopped around the front side of the body. That's typically a byproduct of not pushing the feet hard enough, not getting the elbows up high enough. Even though the arms are not creating the motion, they're directing and accelerating the weight up as a part of the power that we've created. So if your elbows get stuck into your ribs, a lot of people will try to clean the weight out. That's the way you get the giant thump into the body, and you'll often never get the weight upon the fist. The other is if people sort of over clean and get the weight into the crooks of the arm. That's a byproduct of very similar things, meaning that people will try to basically hip a weight up. They're usually using too light of a weight. If you give someone a heavier weight, they can't do that. And they're also not getting the elbows up, not creating power through the body upwards. So if we can clean the fist first, if we nail that, then cleaning the front load is easy. So just let's do about 2 reps going to that front loaded position. So that's easy, right? Come back down. One more. See how there's really no pounding on her chest. There's no impact. Jess and I sort of, roll our eyes when people are proud that they have basically bruises on their collarbones, or their chest, or arms from doing cleans like this. This is a fluid and efficient action. It should not be causing pain upon the body to do so. Usually what happens is it's a problem of the elbows. People either get their elbows glued into their side and try to flip the bag, or they throw the bag out in front of them, the elbow comes away from the bag, and then they have that impact upon the body as well. Cleaning the fist first will, excuse the pun, clean up a lot of that, because you'll find out the compensations that you typically have, and generally it happens where people are so focused upon lifting with the arms, they forget about the qualities with their feet. So I love what DVRT master and my old good friend and colleague Troy Anderson has to say about the kettlebell clean. It's the linchpin exercise. And what he means by that is the idea that it opens up the door for so many other kettlebell movements. I couldn't agree more. It's unfortunate that people have gotten so far away from kettlebell cleans, probably because they don't know how to solve the biggest issue we have with kettlebells, and probably the only issue we really have with kettlebells is when people get that whack a wrist. But just like any other implement, if we're getting that bruising, if we're getting that high impact upon our body, it means we're doing something wrong. But I think unfortunately what happens to a lot of coaches is they simply don't know how to fix it. So they end up dumping the kettlebell clean and only focusing on things like swings and get-ups, which is really unfortunate, because the kettlebell clean gives us an opportunity to develop power, but also gives us an idea of how to look at different movement patterns and build better qualities of overall functional training. So let's get into it. So probably the first thing, and again, I have to thank Troy Anderson for this, is using the high pull as an opportunity to teach the clean. And why I say that is when people grab onto a kettlebell, it feels heavy in the hands. So they automatically default to wanting to curl the weight because we're a very upper body dominant society to begin with. So it feels heavy in the hand, I'm going to try to use my arm, and what ends up happening, instead of thinking about moving my hand around the kettlebell, I try to move the kettlebell around my hand, and that's where I get that fist. So one of the whacker risks comes from is too tight of a grip through the duration of the exercise. The kettlebell clean is a great demonstration of relaxation and tension balance. So I have to be tense at the right parts, I have to be relaxed at the right parts, otherwise the movement doesn't happen. So the kettlebell high pull gives me the same thing. But I call it a high pull clean because we're going to have an end point where we catch the weight right by the horns. So it's also teaching me the idea that during the kettlebell clean, it's more of a zipping up of the body, or think about zipping up of a jacket, where I'm not coming up high with my elbows, unlike I would with a ultimate sandbag clean or even a barbell clean, and that's where the kettlebell is very different. I'm not trying to get very high up here, I'm not trying to get out here, I'm trying to get just up in here, almost like a zipper punch. And I want to get really tight really fast. So to teach that, I want to use that kettlebell clean high pull. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the swing element out of it because it just adds another dimension that often adds confusion. So I'm going to start more like a deadlift, but I am going to tilt the kettlebell a little bit to start with because that's going to get me more in that hip hinge progression. So I want to be back, like we talked about with the deadlift. I'm going to hinge, I'm going to create tension. See how the kettlebell's tilted? I'm creating tension against the handle, and I'm going to push to my feet, come up and catch. Now I got to use my feet to come back quickly to get back in that position. So what you're learning is both how to create force in the ground, but how I have to be tight and then relax, tight, relax, tight. So it's tight, relax, tight, tight, relax, tight. And how I have to quickly release with my hands. And you have to sort of tell your client what you're doing. I'm not throwing the weight up, I'm putting so much force with the ground that the weight started floating up, so I'm re-gripping the weight. And you want to take the opportunity to pause up in here because you want to think about the top of the goblet. It's a good opportunity to work on the plank, understand where you are in space, and prepare your body to come down to absorb the weight appropriately. All right, guys, so what we've got to do next is try to get more into that specific clean position. At some level, you've got to get people familiar with what the end position feels like. And I think that's a little bit the trouble with the kettlebell clean, is that a lot of people don't know what the end feels like. So when they immediately go into cleans, they're almost apprehensive about it, and that causes a lot of the movement compensations to begin with. So for what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a two-handed clean. This used to be called a cheek clean, but I don't like that name because it makes it sound like you're doing something bad. So it's a two-hand clean. It's a great way to give people more control over the implement, sort of like we were talking about with the ultimate sandbag, and get them more balanced control so they can understand what those positions are supposed to feel like. So what's going to happen is if I'm coming to my right side, my right hand was going to grab on the handle first, my left hand's going to come underneath. So my left arm is not really going to pull the weight, it's just going to help direct the motion of the weight. At the same time, I'm going to grab a little bit off center of the kettlebell. This is another thing that sort of makes a small thing that makes a big difference for a lot of people, is if you grab directly in the middle, people tend to sort of throw the bell a little bit more, the elbow comes away, you get more of that flipping and the whack of wrist. Coming towards the edge of the kettlebell, I'm going to get a little bit a different feel and be able to wrap my hand around a little bit more. I still want to think about that zipper action of the bell, but I'm doing that combined with a little bit more instability that's going to come off to the side of my body. So again, setting up, and you see how I have the bell slightly turned? So I'm going to grab towards the curved end here. Other hand comes in. I'm going to get a nice position. Now I can tilt the kettlebell a little bit. That helps it lock in this lat. And what I'm going to do is one motion, come right into the bell. And I want to start taking my hand away for a moment so I understand what that weight feels like. To come down, I can reposition, the elbow stays close, lead with the hips, I'm right back down. So again, tight, loose, tight. Tight, loose, tight. And notice, if I don't move my hips fast enough, I simply won't come up. So while I'm not coming dramatically up with my elbow still has to fire fast. I still have to move quickly to sort of get the weight in the right position. Let's do it again on the other side. And this is great because now I'm getting a little bit multi-planar work. I'm resisting rotation a little bit. Plant, I can tilt, right position. Plant, right back. So notice how my elbows are really never coming away from my body and I'm ending up in the same position I'm starting at. So that's a good way of knowing if I'm getting my hips back fast enough to absorb the weight in the clean. That's going to go a long ways and then making the leap to single arm cleans much easier. So I think it's worth making note of a couple of things. So when we move to double kettlebells for the cleans, people have a really bad habit of doing a couple of things. One is they get extra wide with their feet. Now understand that there's way more force coming at my body, so it's natural for me to want to create a bigger base of stability to absorb that force. However, if I get too wide, I'm going to start losing the quality of that hip hinge, because that's also usually associated where people start turning their feet out a lot, and so when they're really trying to make space, and what ends up happening is I start using my adductors way more than my hamstrings. So it's been shown a lot of times, a lot of people use their adductors to substitute for weak hamstrings and hip extension. So what they do is they get into these positions where, again, they default to wide bases, feet turn out, and they don't actually build up the hamstring and that connection with the glute, so they don't actually get the carryover that they think they're supposed to get. So I'm 6'3", 6'4" on a good day, and I basically take my jumping stance and 1 foot out. So I don't need a ton of room, because if I'm gripping the ground with my feet, now you can turn your feet out slightly, but if I'm gripping the ground with my feet, what ends up happening is my knees open up. So again, by gripping the ground, that's what gives me the clearance with the kettlebells. So whether I'm starting from a dead stop, so if I set the bells up in line with my arch or towards my heel, and notice I make a little V shape, that's also going to help a lot of people versus trying to come over the top. If I get in that position, and I grab my feet, see how it opens up my pelvis, I can then get in position, and that's really nice and easy. If I were to go really wide, I think that also gets people in trouble because they can't use their hips very well from that position. They tend to throw the kettlebells out. Even if I'm going a pre-swing where I'm actually going to swing the bells back first, I want to do the same thing. It's the feet that really are important. So again, if you're not thinking about feet all the time, and you may get tired of us talking about, but it really isn't that important, then people compensate in other ways, and one of them is building that big base. So if I start in a nice position here, I'm not that wide. I can go ahead and tilt both bells, so my lats are still engaged. That's still nice and comfortable. So the moral of the story is, the wider you get, the more people tend to lose a lot of their hamstring glutes, and because they're not using their feet, they're not pushing the ground, they're not creating that powerful hip extension, they're not getting the stability to the pelvis that they think they are. So remember, one reason we're focusing so much on glute training is that we want to create that force closure upon the SI joint that stabilizes the joint, that allows me to have more resiliency in my low back, but also to do everyday activities far superior. So these little small cues end up becoming a big deal, especially as I increase the load upon the bells. Yes, I understand the bells do get bigger, but again, even at very big bells, they're not so much bigger that I have to make that much clearance with my legs. Keep these in mind when you're giving people these tips and where they're staying in position, and make sure you're preparing them appropriately for these progressions.